Welcome to the ICS-ISAC Monthly Member Briefing, Industrial Control System Cybersecurity in the Chemical Sector. Hosted by ICS-ISAC Chair Chris Blask, the presentation features CSC's Chief Technology Officer for Cybersecurity, Ed Liebig, as this month's featured speaker. We will start off today's call with Chris Blask giving a center update before turning the presentation over to Ed Liebig. But first, a few housekeeping guidelines. Chris will take a few minutes to brief you all on the latest developments from the center. Next, Ed will spend about 35 or 40 minutes for his presentation. And finally, there will be time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. I will be attempting to keep as many of you as possible off of mute so that you can speak your thoughts or raise questions as appropriate. But please mute your headsets or phones if necessary to help reduce unwanted background noise. When speaking, please introduce yourself and indicate your industry affiliation. Additionally, if you'd like to ask a question, you may also use the hand raise feature in the GoToWebinar application. After the meeting, a recording of this session will be available on the ICS-ISAC website at www.ics-isac.org. Slides may be available upon request at the presenter's discretion. Please contact an ICS-ISAC staff member for further information. So now, without any further delay, Chris, it's over to you for our center update.
Thanks, Debbie, and thanks everyone for dropping in today. As Debbie had said, what I'm going to do here is talk a minute about what the ISAC is, who we are, where we came from, what we're up to. And as well, we'll try to keep this as interactive as possible. I know a number of you out there are on this call are industry recognized subject matter expertise, and your input is as valuable as mine, and in many cases more so. So who are we? This center was put together with the idea that that information sharing is key, that there's a stratum and a structure of information sharing entities and individuals emerging. Part of this is the ISAC structure, which was originally initiated in 1998 under a presidential decision directive, re-upped under Homeland Security in 2003, and has evolved a structure something like you see here, where there's a number of industry vertical centers that have various experience over the past now 15 years since the term was initially coined, and a horizontal that do various tasks in tying these together. The National Council of Multi-State ISAC serve great purposes in bundling these for national or local purposes. And the supply chain IT and now ICS-ISAC talk to issues that are commonalities across all sectors. There's been a broad organization of people and organizations involved in thinking through whether the center should exist and what it should be doing and so forth. The people you see on the screen there, of course, was myself, Sean McGurk, who is responsible for creating the U.S. national system. So while Debbie was bringing those slides up, if you could see the graphic on the slide, you'd see a vertical and horizontal structure. And as I was saying, there's myself, Sean, Jim Sorbo, who's a senior technical advisor, Robert Martin, who's on the phone with us now, is the treasurer. Debbie, you've met. Steve Mason has been working as membership advisor, and Glenn Merrill is now the workforce development director. So Debbie, if you will let me know when you have those slides up. So the concept of creating a horizontal ISAC is based on the idea that we're living in an interconnected world. As you see on this graphic, the wheels within the wheels, this is based on referencing a study done about 10 years ago by Carnegie Mellon, showing the interconnectivity of systems. As we all know, it's hard to have power without water and transportation and so forth, and everything is connected. Then if you can click again, you just see more detail in this matrix, how everything applies. The link for this study is actually on this slide as well, and a very good look at how we drive it, interconnectivity. And then if you click again, that brings us to the third graphic on that slide. So in as much as all of these systems are connected and interdependent, we saw a need to have an information sharing node that was focusing on the commonalities and the connectivity of systems to complement the existing vertical systems. Debbie, you can go to the next slide, the interdependent world. So while we haven't seen a failure that we know of cascading failure of interconnecting systems due to cybersecurity attacks specifically, we have seen this due to other reasons. For those of us older enough to remember the day the pagers died, this was due to the failure of a rather quaint little satellite circling the Earth. It brought down 90% of pagers, credit card transactions, ATMs that hit the financial sector, and was probably, though undocumented to my knowledge, the first case where cascading infrastructure failures led to the loss of human life, since it's known that first responders and healthcare providers were impaired in their ability to provide their services at that time. In 2001, most of us probably remember when the California electrical grid was problematic for a number of reasons. Studies done at that time showed significant financial losses and impacts in industrial manufacturing and other sectors, leading to reduction in stability of the larger grid outside California, just the electric sector, and also loss of capabilities in other energy production. And just last month, when we did the first briefing, coincidentally, there was a natural gas pipeline that, again, not due to cyber purposes, but exploded and took out a major interstate highway, causing interruptions of services and transportation. And next slide, please, Debbie, the data information knowledge. So while these centers were called information sharing analysis centers, there's a very specific point that we try to focus on at the ISAC. This is related to a lot of the known issues we have with information sharing, and that's being clear in the taxonomy we're using. And in most of our functions, what we're looking at is really knowledge sharing. Data can be looked at as very granular, site-specific, device-specific. Perhaps you can look at it as syslog messages and IDS alerts and so forth, MAC addresses, IP addresses, topologies, and so forth. As we all know, anybody who's been involved with information sharing conversations, this sort of information, this sort of knowledge can be very problematic for people to share for a lot of reasons, liability, privacy, and so forth. Information in this stack, as we look at it, is an aggregation of data. So if you are an asset owner and you're managing a system, take all of that data put together that tells you everything that's going on in your system, what it is, what it looks like, and how you actually manage to achieve an operational end on your system. This, again, is problematic to share for all the same reasons. Knowledge of that data and information is not, however, necessarily as difficult and problematic to share. As we talk about examples, knowing that as a nation that 1/3 of water facilities or 17 electrical co-ops in the southeast states all came into attack is more important to most of us who are not directly operating those systems than what exact system it was, what exact asset owner it was. So in as much as we can frame this correctly, we can achieve a number of ends. We can get the knowledge flowing, get the information flowing to achieve the stability of our cultures and societies and municipalities, which is what we're really after, as well as we can help the legislation that is being developed, help the legislators that are doing that work have the right means, the right mental concepts and building blocks to create legislation that isn't going to drive us all crazy later on. Next, please, Debbie, the Global Knowledge Network. So the ISAC we see fitting into a structure that's been developing for a long time. If we look at this from the bottom up, we have a responsibility as the subject matter experts involved in solving this regional, national, international problem, in helping asset owners develop the capabilities so that they have the situational awareness, they have the ability to create knowledge about their own systems. That they know what they have, they know what it's doing, they can tell when something bad happens. Without that base foundation of capabilities, there's not much we can really do to help them. We can run around patching things and pen testing and so forth, which is all good, but in the end doesn't necessarily lead to really secure and reliable systems. Wherein we start to have facilities that have that capability to know what they have and know the difference and be able to detect what's going on, then they can work with existing relationships with service providers, with integrators and others that have confidentiality, have trust relationships, where they can share the actual data and information in various forms without raising the kind of problems we have with information sharing in the general public. And those service providers, the integrators, are a big part of this phase as we move through the next several years with addressing this problem nationally and locally. The service providers provide an enormous value in being able to take that data and information and convert it to knowledge for everyone else's greater good. And whether those, pardon me, whether those asset owners are communicating through service providers or directly in one way or another with knowledge sharing centers like the ICS-ISAC, they'll build relationships with, one way of looking at it, 3 different major types of center. Public centers, like here in the U.S., the ICS-CERT, and with state fusion centers and so forth. Private centers, examples being like Nesco TAC, the energy sector operating, and other dedicated knowledge centers, as well as the vendors and the integrators, companies like CSC that have relationships with asset owners and therefore have a lot of knowledge and relationships with vendors and others in the community where they create a lot of knowledge. And then the private public centers like the ICS-ISAC, where the public sector and private sector try to get together to share information as well as they can. So over the last year and 2 years, particularly, the last 3, 5, 7 years, in a broader perspective, these capabilities at the asset owner level have been developing. The service providers have been advancing their ability to help the asset owners. And the centers like the ICS-ISAC, like the ICS-CERT, and others have been emerging, not just here in the U.S., but around the world. Next slide, please, Debbie. And this one has a bunch of clicks, so I'll just give you clicks to go through this. So on top of the human-level knowledge sharing that's been going on around the industry, that other ISACs and other centers have been developing knowledge sharing like this session itself. One of the focuses of the ICS-ISAC is to enable real-time knowledge sharing. That you can click once again, where you can have knowledge sources, like a researcher or a vendor or an asset owner, somebody who has a new piece of knowledge that needs to be shared. Can share that with the ICS-ISAC or ultimately with other centers. Click again, please. And that knowledge then is shared in real time appropriately with other centers, trade organizations, CERTs, service providers, integrators, other ISAC, and nationally, locally, internationally, fusion centers, and so forth. And one more click, please, and we should be able to see asset owners now receiving this knowledge. In the update, we'll talk a second from now about a pilot we're engaging with to put this into place and test it out in the first half of this year. And now in this scenario, we have the ability for all of us as a culture to take a single piece of knowledge and turn it into active defenses in real time at asset owners. So if that knowledge was coming from another asset owner, for example, who'd experienced an attack, it's possible that we can build these systems so that we have what amounts to an autoimmune system, that every other asset owner who is potentially at risk has the ability to, as they choose, at least be aware if it's hitting them, or potentially actually put active defenses in so that they become immune to this. And one more click. Additionally, you start to get this feedback loop, so that you take the case of an active attack, and this asset owner in the lower left has now put their defenses in place, run a forensic scan of their history, and can share knowledge such as, I first saw this activity, I first saw this threat 6 months ago, and in the last 3 months it's increased, and in the last 6 days it's spiked. That knowledge can be shared back up through these sorts of structures, and one more click please, and shared throughout the entire knowledge network, so that we as a nation, for example, can have the ability to say things like, in the U.S., this attack has first been seen 6 months ago in electric, in co-ops, and has in the last 90 days spread to water and is increasing in frequency. You can rotate that logic model and look at it from a vendor's perspective, where they can actually get the feedback to see that with a new vulnerability that they've shared with asset owners, whether or not it's ever been seen, whether it's a huge issue that they need to put large resources behind or not. So next, click please to the ICS-ISAC update page. So this is the direction we've been leading. As you can see here, the center has just had its 6-month anniversary. We're fairly pleased with the progress we've made in that context. The initial conception happened in April or May of last year. We started with the idea that perhaps something like this should exist. Began expanding that conversation when people like Gibb Sorbo and Sean McGurk got involved and create some validation points, and with other vendors and asset owners and creators in the space. We got the thing actually created in June, worked through the summer to get basic capabilities, put a website up, start gathering open source information and putting that in a single spot. Putting in that period certain basic structures. One of the values and challenges that we thought that we could address was the effective filtering of information. So, for example, as an ISAC member, each member is able to manage their profile, so they can select, at this point at least, what vendor information they're actually concerned with. So they're not getting spammed with every piece of information in the world, but they're able to filter it down to exactly what they want. And we'll continue to expand that granularity so that we can reflect the knowledge feed that people actually need. We think we have a lot of information floating out there now, but it really is nothing compared to the volumes we'll see in coming years. So in October, we did a demonstration of a basic knowledge sharing structure that we put in place, where we had information coming into the center and flowing in real time to an MSSP and becoming an active rule on systems they had. In November, we advanced some of the community functions. Debbie Acneas, the volunteer at that time, helped us identify idea scale, for example, that FEMA and the White House and other people use to share knowledge. And as we go forward in this quarter and next quarter, we'll advance those human level components like this and like white papers and various other pieces. Last month, Billy Rios was kind enough to do a talk on treating Niagara. And this month, of course, Ed is joining us to talk about the chemical sector. We have Mickey Calero, who's the Chief Security Officer for the City of Columbus, talking about municipalities next month, and a number of the next months listed out on the website. So we'll look to communicate these briefings out to people as much as possible, but you should always be able to go to our forums, like the website, like the LinkedIn group, and so forth, and find the upcoming events. And this month, we're making actually a lot of progress on things. We're offering internships now. Glenn Merrill, as I mentioned, has joined us officially as a workforce development director. He's been advising the center for the last several months. As we're working with academia and others who have run intern programs to start creating workforce development opportunities for young people. There'll be a focus of this, of course, on advancing for those of us who are no longer in college. We have a lot of workforce knowledge sharing that needs to be done to make sure that we have enough people to do all these things. As I mentioned, the City of Columbus has gotten involved with the center in December, and among other activities, they've agreed to be part of real-time sharing, knowledge sharing pilot. So this will be an instantiation of the architecture that I showed on the previous slide, where we'll have organizations like Emerging Threats Pro and Palantir who are involved in this, and others who can create individual pieces of knowledge or analysis, share that through the center with, in this case, in the pilot at least, Columbus's operations center, it'll be shared down to sensors and infrastructure in their traffic management, water facilities, and various other pieces they have. And then work through both the technical issues as well as the procedural issues on how we define the information that gets shared, how it gets shared, and just basically the usual sort of pilot stuff, what crooks and crannies are in there that can be useful. And Debbie, please take us to the next slide. Membership. So, officially thanks to Ed and CSC and everybody else who's joined us over time to provide support for the center. The center, one of the initial decisions we made in the center is we'd rather not take public money if we can get it, particularly with strings attached, that this center is primarily a forum for the private sector to share with each other, and to work through these issues. And various organizations have been joining since the early days. That's increasing. We encourage all of you listening out there to consider being involved. I know some of the attendees already are those organizations. And next slide, Debbie, if I'm not mistaken, that takes us to the introduction for Ed, who I will thank in advance for his talk, and I'll thank in retrospect when I'm done. So Debbie, it's all yours.
Thanks, Chris, for the update. And now for this month's ICS-ISAC featured speaker. Ed Liebig is an information technology executive with extensive expertise in information security, computer operations, telecommunication, and networking. Ed's proven ability to build and lead information systems operation and security groups, combined with his track record as an IT security management specialist, make him perfectly positioned to address the challenging issue of chemical sector cybersecurity. Ed, the floor is now yours, so let's go ahead and go on with your presentation.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you, Chris. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. If you could advance the slide to my cover slide.
Okay.
I just want to go over a little background for everybody of what we're going to cover today. The cybersecurity in the chemical sector, we have been working, CSC has been working with industry leaders, industry thought leaders like Tom Good, Eric Kosman, Joe Weiss, and then operational leaders such as Eric Feldmeyer in coming up with a way to measure risk in the chemical sector's ICS environments with the changes in the threat landscape, the changes in the world and global views of critical infrastructure. So today I'm going to touch a little bit on some of the driving factors in that, and then the meat of the presentation is really going to look at our collaborative view of, or our cumulative view of how to really try to put your arms around the risk in the ICS community as been developed in the chemical sector. So if you could advance one more, please. What we've been seeing, and it's been in the news, CNN is reporting it, the mainstream media has picked up that the increases in reported cyber attacks on critical infrastructure and industrial control systems, as reported by the ICS CERT, 2,100%. That's not a typo. That's 2,100% between 09 and 011. So the attacks are up. The reported attacks are up. Companies are losing billions of dollars. Keith Alexander made who is the commander of the U.S. Cyber Command at the time, made the statement that cybercrime represents the largest illegal transfer of wealth in history. So referring somewhat to the financial sector, but that same sentiment goes to the critical infrastructure in the ICS world. Cyber threats are growing. It's a problem. Next slide, please. So the background on what the metamorphosis of the attackers, it's gone from the lead hackers, the script kiddies and whatnot, in through cyber criminals, which are really looking for the financial gain. Now we're looking at the nation states and the terrorist organizations. They're highly funded. They don't care if they stomp around. They don't care if they get caught in your environment. They want to do damage to your environment, and they're going to do it. And that's kind of the progression of what we've seen and what we're currently dealing with, the advanced persistent threats in the environments. Next slide, please. If you couple these threats with the growing business and operational challenges of the chemical sector and manufacturing sectors in general, doing more with less. So, revolutionary business changes like BizCloud, like big data, like bring your own device, social media, has come in and put some IT operational strain on infrastructure. That and looking to do more with less also, from the business side, is looking to glean more information from your production facility to get real-time business metrics and get that the real business process, the just-in-time ordering, the supply chain management functions that allow you to cut costs and get operational insight. And then if you look in the operations side, traditionally, There's always been a dichotomous relationship between IT and the ICS owners. The asset owners on the plant floor, they are the owners for a reason because they know intimately what these devices are doing in the plant. They have to be intimately involved. But traditionally, the thought process has been operations. It has been uptime. It has been production. It has been drilled into them that their main focus is to make product and keep that plant humming. There has to be a mind shift. There has to be some sort of education, awareness, and training process that accompanies this uptime and this production-centric thought process that includes cybersecurity, because cybersecurity is a big risk to the organizations. And typically when you look at an operations person, if you look at somebody who owns the assets on the plant floor, when it comes to cybersecurity, if you ask the question, what's the impact if this machine is compromised from a cyber perspective? The first thing out of their mouth is, well, we have safety interlock systems. Nothing will happen. But that's from a life, health, safety standpoint. That's not the only risk. Next slide, please. So what we've come up with and what we've been massaging over the past couple of years is the thought that when you're looking at measuring risk in the industrial control environments, you need to have corporate policies that really lay out what is security, what is our regulatory obligation, what's our business objectives. But to those policies, you need to attach standards that go down into the individual devices on the plant floor. They really need to be on a device-by-device basis is what we found. Because you can have two exactly identical pieces of gear, same operating system, same patch revision level, same everything. From a cyber perspective, they are at the same potential risk. But from an impact perspective, they may be doing different things in the plant, therefore their impact is different, therefore their risk posture is different. So you really need to be cognizant of context when you're looking at these devices to make sure that you're measuring the devices based on what they do in your environment and what the impact to your business is going to be. Next slide, please. So you really need to look at your standards based on specifics of your ICS environment and how it operates and what the operational needs are. One of my favorite examples when I talk with folks is a lot of times we're approached and people say, well, we failed our audits in the ICS world several times. And my first question is, what are you auditing against? What are you measuring against? What's your yardstick? And they'll come back and say, well, best practice. So we use the ISO standards. Okay, well, let's look at ISO standards. If you are to take unique identification or username and password to the plant floor and try to enforce that in a control room, it fails miserably. You cannot afford the time in a control room to log off a machine, log on. So you can't take a one-to-one relationship with policies or standards that were written for a LAN-WAN environment and apply them directly to the ICS environment. It has to be custom standards. And you have to take the time to go through those standards and say, how is this applicable? And I like to use the term, what is the spirit of the standard? Why is it being asked? And you want to craft a standard for your ICS environment that meets that spirit. And you may not meet it in all cases, in all plants, by the letter. You may not meet it exactly one-to-one. You may have to meet the spirit of that standard and be creative in your security safeguards to ensure that you're meeting what's intended. Next slide, please. So let's look at the potential threat groups and threat vectors. You need to really break down what's at risk and what's the attack vector that might be chosen to really affect a change in your environment. We typically look at physical, cyber, and operational challenges that may come into play. Local access to the facilities, local access to the equipment, or misuse of the equipment from a physical standpoint, remote access or malware, and then if you look at operational misconfigurations, administration challenges, what are your policies around change control, those types of things are very important to look at when you're trying to assess the risk of your devices. Now, when we assess the risk of these devices, we're not using the traditional risk measurement process. Your traditional out-of-the-box risk measurement says what's your probability of attack and what's the impact. That's what everybody says. What's the probability, what's the impact? That's the traditional way of measuring. Well, if you go back to the early slides, with 2,100% increase in cyber attacks, your probability is pretty high. You're going to be attacked. So how do you really put your arms around probability? In the same token, if you look back at historical data and try to establish that probability, this has all changed very quickly. So historically, you wouldn't have a leg to stand on from a traditional risk perspective. You wouldn't have a leg to stand on to say the sky is falling, we need to do something. Because historically, it has increased so quickly and so much that you won't have that data. So what we have chosen to do is measure risk mostly by the impact. What is the impact of this system being compromised by one of these vectors? With that impact, how can we minimize that impact? Well, you can minimize that impact through the application of those standards. So theoretically, if you don't meet any of the standards, your probability of attack or probability of impact is going to be much higher than if you do meet your standards. Therefore, you're lowering the potential impact. Next slide, please. So when we're looking at the impact, we need to set that boundary. We need to look at what is the yardstick we're going to measure these devices with. So we've got our attack vector from the physical, cyber, or operational standpoint. Now we need to think through, back to that other example, when you talk to the operations folks and you say, what happens if this device is compromised? The first thing they'll say is, well, there's a safety interlock system. There's nothing will happen. Okay, from the injury category across the top in line A, yes, maybe nothing will happen. But your safety interlock system is designed to either jump in and perform the function or do a controlled shutdown of the line. Well, that controlled shutdown has a lot of ramifications: wasted product, downtime of production, financial loss. So you need to look at what's important to your business and what you want to measure the risk and what do you want to measure the impact from. Get those categories defined and then figure out your threshold. What is your tolerance from a minor, major, or severe impact standpoint? Once you understand that, now you can start setting the bar, device by device. Next slide, please. So to accomplish this, we like to amass teams that are comprised of both IT leadership and operational leadership, driving the effort with IT personnel and operations personnel working together to set that benchmark. And this has a couple of benefits. One, the expertise of the devices and how they're used and what happens in a production setting is voiced very clearly. It's articulated very clearly by the operations folks. And the actual attack vectors and potential attacks and the security, the cybersecurity scenarios can be well thought through with the help of the IT folks. So you have the benefits of both of these lines of thought coming together to actually set that establishment of risk for that particular device. At the same time, you have cross-pollination of education. Your operational folks, you can actually, it's actually refreshing. You can watch around the table as the light bulb goes on and they go, oh, I see, yeah, the safety interlock system will kick in, but we'll still lose lots of money, and that's a problem. And the IT folks will see why it's a challenge that they can't just say, patch your systems. These systems are unpatched. They'll get it that they can't patch them. They'll get it that the software may not run. They start to see the light on what challenges are. And together they can all think out of the box and meet the spirit of what's being required from a cybersecurity standpoint. Next slide, please. So when you address these risks in your environment, you actually have benefits across your business. You maximize your brand equity. You protect the brand image. You have a cognizant plan to mitigate your cybersecurity threats so that you can attain more confidence. And you can get that training, that cross-pollinated training between IT and operations. You can get that collaborative teamwork together, and there can be a unified ownership of cybersecurity from the plant level. And I think that is a lot of the cross benefits in looking at addressing your risk establishment for these devices. Next slide, please. And the obligation is on everybody. If you look at critical infrastructure in general, the wheels within the wheels that Chris went over, every one of these segments, every one of these industry verticals, and they all have the same challenge. How do we wrap our arms around the risk? How do we perform cybersecurity at the operational level? How do we measure it and make sure that we're doing the right things and make it so we can come back, audit, and ensure that cybersecurity is part of our job one. Next slide, please. This slide, I'll let it speak for itself. This is CSC, a little background on us. We are thought leaders in this area. If you have any questions at all, make sure to ask. And I think that's really the end of my presentation.
Great. Thank you, Ed, for that enlightening briefing. That was excellent. We'll now open it up for questions. Again, introduce yourself and indicate your industry affiliation. Or you can enter your question through the GoToWebinar application or use the hand raise feature, and we'll unmute you so that you can ask your question.
Yeah, Ed, this is Chris. So to start things off, so CSC has a lot of experience in this particular sector, and I've got my own thoughts on this. But let me ask you. Do you think in the chemical sector, so many of us spend so much of our time in the electric sector? How is the chemical sector doing? Is the awareness good enough? What are the drivers that are making people move forward in that area?
Well, I think that awareness is definitely picked up in the last couple of years. At least in the chemical sector, Stuxnet was a big attention grabber, and the momentum has not stopped with Shodan and some of the other revelations, the oh, you know what moments in our recent history. So I think awareness is up. I think that CFATS itself, the Chemical Facilities Anti-Terror Standard, wasn't nearly as much of a driver as just regular operational, doing more with less, and the realization that cybersecurity is a big deal.
The workforce development issue has been a lot on my mind recently. Do you see the capabilities existing out there to in the asset owners to address needs, or are they better or worse than the other sectors as far as having the staff? Are they timing out on a high end? Do we have the same sort of loss to retirement without the backfill?
I see that the backfill is slowing. You know, it's like I said, more with less. Losing folks through attrition, through retirement, is an operational boon in some cases. If they can automate processes, they will. So I see that as just a general trend across all manufacturing, really. You know, I think it's going to be imperative that we are able to measure risk, we are able to manage risk as part of the operations, because we are going to be trying to open up systems that were traditionally air-gapped and traditionally separated. We are going to be facing more and more challenges as the architecture changes.
Well, I know Joel Langle is with us out there in the world, and he's got himself on mute as a good attendee does. But he and I have talked about some of the benefits that the chemical sector has, and how the regulations, both internal and external, in the chemical sector, put them in a better position than a lot of other sectors. You know, that they have to go down that road. And Joel, if you want to throw your thoughts out on that, or Ed, you want to speak to that, I think there's a lesson learned for all of us.
Is the audio okay on my end?
Yeah.
Yep, you sound great.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Now, this is Joel. The biggest concern I have, though, is that the whole issue around NERC, SIP, and CFATS is that all ICS falls into that category. And unfortunately, the large majority, and we're talking probably greater than 95%, if not higher, of the ICS systems that are deployed don't fall under those categories. And that's why we're having the biggest challenge with the whole awareness, is that these issues are causing people to think that all of their threats are terrorist-based. That is just so false. That is not the threats that are accounting for the outages and the downtime that these systems are seeing as a result of cyber events. That's where I think a lot of these standards and the direction of the industry needs to shift, because we're kind of missing the obvious. We're trying to address the high impact, low probability threats rather than the low impact, low probability threats, which are the ones that are really causing us problems. So the sites that I've actually done assessments on have significant problems due to availability that result not from external threats coming in, but the accidental and unintentional consequences of people doing things that they should not be doing, but they didn't know any better. So what are your views on that, Ed?
No, I absolutely agree with your take that that not all events are the terrorist organizations. A cyber event is a cyber event, and it can be something as simple as a router getting choked up by a piece of malware on your LAN WAN. And as far as people doing the wrong things, I think the metric from a security standpoint still holds true, that 80% of your cyber events are from the inside, and mostly due to oops, if you get down to it. So I think still looking at standards and process in your organization is about the best way to address that. I don't know of any other magic formula except having very succinct standards that you can try to adhere to, and then if you can't adhere to them directly, ensure that you have some mitigating safeguards that address the spirit of that standard.
Yeah, I mean, I find myself on the fence of this. So standards and compliance instead of security and so forth, are always one of those tough issues. And on the other hand, the local impact of large failures is something we just can't ignore. And how do we make sure that all boats rise together? And the cascading impacts, that we can foresee. At some point in the future, certainly 5 and 10 years from now, intelligent attackers will be looking to cause significant impacts across sectors. How do we move that forward? I almost can't say and bring myself to say how do we move that forward without standards. But I guess for those of us directly involved in this, how do we make sure that those standards are appropriate, that they're not draconian, that they actually drive people towards security instead of compliance. And I think, you know, my ongoing thought is that at the end of the day, you know, as it's public entities and government entities and so forth that may end up creating these standards, you know, if we don't like them, those of us in the private sector, it will be really hard not to point the finger at ourselves. You know, we just can't expect, you know, bureaucracies that are put in place to serve the public good to understand these issues better than we do.
Yeah, but Chris, the problem with the standards is that it's clear that all of these standards are being written by IT security folks. They really, most of these standards, if not all, seriously lack the operational side of how to comply. I mean, look at NERC-CIP. NERC-CIP was absolutely a failure until 5 because it was written almost entirely around protecting Windows devices. And in an ICS world, that represents about 1/3 of the IP space. So if you directly correlate that, it represents about 1/3 of the attack surface. And only until version 5 came out did it really start to look at addressing the non-traditional, let's just say non-Wintel devices. I mean, if you look at NIST, if you look at ISO 27001 and 2, if you look at the DHS catalog of security controls, all they're talking about is implementing security around the common IT technology. Very few of them really lack how to address securing the embedded world of industrial controls. I mean, how do you prevent malware from getting on a PLC? Now, you can't say go buy a new PLC because that's not real. So you look at these standards and, you know, I got the most ridiculous email ever from a poor engineer in Iran who's still fighting Stuxnet saying, do you know any good antivirus software for a PLC? Initially, it sounds like a stupid question, but it's a brilliant question. Do they really know that they need to protect the PLC because that is the final element? Yet, not one of these standards helps end users, owner-operators, asset owners, whatever you want to call them, protect the highest valued, the highest level of risk should they be compromised assets in these architectures. And I don't know where we're going to go because I was hoping great things for ISA 99, but they're kind of whittling away at that to make it more ISO 27000-like. So I'm hoping that a few of the components, like the 3.3 piece, stays. But if anybody on the call was involved in the voting of 3.3, it really met a huge set of resistance from the community. So I don't think the standards are going to get us there, Chris. It's going to be common risk-based methodical approaches to implementing security. I think that's going to get us there.
Well, so I agree with everything you just said, in that the group standards aren't going to get you there. And that's one of the reasons why, if you go back to one of my slides that shows the team structure, that's one of the reasons why we like to say you have to come up as a company with your standards. They're not going to come out of a box. They have to come from your people in your environment, your standards. So back to that, how do you protect a PLC? Your standard may become you know, more segmentation or more isolation of those PLCs from other type devices through device-to-device communication throttling, through known address addressing if it's IP-based, or through other mechanisms of control specific to your environment. I don't think that we're going to find any of these consortiums of everybody and their brother coming up with a standard that's going to apply to everybody. Because even in the same company, we're finding differences from plant to plant. Let's face it; these businesses are you know, they grow through mergers and acquisitions and divestitures. So these plants are changing hands. They're different architectures. There's no uniformity. There's a single plant that may have been added on to 16 times over the past 10 years with different architectures entirely. So you have to really customize it per location, and you have to come up with standards for that location based on the spirit of what you're trying to do. I mean, I'm going to put the flag in the ground right there.
No, I completely agree. I think that you really hit the nail on the head. And if there's anybody else that wants to jump in, please interrupt. But the reason I kind of am a little bit of an alarmist is because a lot of these entities that are just starting to become aware of the problem are turning to trusted entities like ICS-CERT. Yet there's not a single thing ICS does that drives them towards some of these better approaches. So you look at the entire ICS-CERT website, you'll never see an ISA 99 document. You'll never see an ISO 27000 document. And that's kind of scary because they're pushing their philosophy on, unfortunately, people that don't know any better. And that's the awareness piece that I really hope that Chris and the ICS-ISAC can start to address. Because being neutral, they can now become a little bit more balanced in how they say, hey, you really ought to look at this document because it really does address a lot more of your problem than this thing that was put together and is available free of charge and is published on this website. Chris, your thoughts?
I agree with pretty well all of this, and keep in mind as you guys know that I'm a pragmatist and an optimist. I don't think it's realistic to think that we're going to be able to avoid standards and regulation, or regulation, I suppose, as opposed to standards. Our task is to make them as non-stupid as possible. I think in an ideal world, we developed best practices propagated through workforce development, so that we're putting engineers in the environment who know how things are supposed to be done. Fred Cohen makes a very good point about the medical space. A heart surgeon is a heart surgeon, and in a lot of the engineering space, we too often, as we all know, are the IT people talking about this. We don't yet have the full involvement of enough of the expertise, particularly the diminishing expertise as people retire, from the engineering space or from the industrial space. But there's a lot of lessons that we learned from that. And Joel, as you said, even in our old favorite pudding boy of NERC SIP, in PIL 5, so they've made progress, and a lot of lessons learned anywhere in any human endeavor. In putting together the ISAC, there's I really can't say enough about the good work done by everybody who's built these other ISACs. Some of them have failed completely. But is that a lack of value, or is that a set of lessons that we can build on? The don't do that is a good lesson. So, I think looking back, 10 and 20 years from now, we'll see how successful we've been, subject matter experts in this space, in guiding things down that road by just how awful the regulations are. These are event-driven things. With the Shamoon hits, there are nation states that have been known to be hit by Shamoon, who have taken guidelines and turned them into requirements. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is that necessary? These are in retrospect questions that we can't do anything about. We've got to move things forward. I like very much your thoughts. This has come up before. We haven't gotten to the point in the center yet of actively promoting and providing links, easily found anyways, to ISO 99 as an example. Where industry itself creates standards, it can be better than having government public sector bureaucracies putting in the regulation. Does that work for you at all, Jill?
Sorry, I had to get my mouse back over to unmute.
No problem. Another one of the issues of our time. But unless there's any comments, we can talk about this all day long. Joel, I'd like to hear your thoughts again, as always. You were have any last thoughts to throw into the mix before we move into the next stages?
No, thank you, Chris. I appreciate the time that you've allotted to let me speak. And if anybody has any questions, the next slide has my contact information.
Hey, Ed, I got one question.
Yes, sir.
Based on your assessment of the clients you've worked with, where do you think they could use the most improvement? I mean, what are they doing right today, and what do you think they could do better tomorrow?
I think that what they're doing right today is they're taking a good focus on putting together these standards that we've been talking about, individualized to the plants themselves. There's a good awareness at the executive level that the biggest challenge for them right now, where they need the most improvement, is actually not something that's their fault. I think that that we need, as a group of professionals, we need to be pressuring academia to put together programs to train people that can sit between the two sides of the house. Traditionally, there are the industrial control system paths in schools, and on the other side, there's information security paths in schools. Never the two shall meet. So, getting the young blood, getting the new people in the plant, they either think one side of the house or the other. And marrying those two together to actual ICS security personnel that can see the larger picture and the interconnectivity is something that I think is a challenge for all of us.
Great. Thanks, Ed, Joel, as always. And Debbie, assuming that we're on that I saved properly, we're on the same slide. If you can advance it to 1, it says something like open discussion or wrap up. And we had in the first of these last month allotted an hour, which turned out not to be enough. Also hasn't been enough. And so we're right at an hour now. I've got some comments to make at the end. Anybody who wants to talk about any other unrelated issues to the specific topic at hand is more than welcome to fill them out while I'm doing that. And we'll go forward with that. So Debbie, if you could advance to one that says staying in touch. And again, hopefully this is the same one that I'm looking at. Again, the center survives both financially as well as by having the intelligence and having the input and having the knowledge, to share and to aggregate and build into use of knowledge with other people through the membership and support of private organizations. You can register on the site. Anybody has any questions about that can contact any of us here at the ISAC. A lot of organizations, are just need to be part of this. And if membership dues need to be postponed or whatnot to allow them to participate, we're more than willing to talk about all that. We have next month at this same time, same bat channel, the third Wednesday of each month this time, the same talks. Next month is going to be Mickey Calero, the Chief Security Officer of Columbus, Ohio. Just to give a plug for Mickey and for that, Mickey's a very interesting individual. You'll see him on the cover of CSO magazine in the next few months. And he's worked with Columbus for 5 years, and previous to that worked with American Electric Power for 7 years. So he's in a very good position in being responsible for this, the 15th largest municipality in the country, to talk about the challenges faced logistically, programmatically, bureaucratically, technically in that space. It's long been the contention of a lot of folks, myself included, that as we move through progressing this issue across sectors, we come down to what's really important, which is really our cultures. And there's no place more where the rubber hits the road than in municipalities and cities and towns themselves. At the end of the day, if you're responsible for this, for a city, if you're responsible for the ongoing function of the infrastructure, it doesn't matter to you if it's a cyber attack, if it's a cyber event, or some other failure is a failure. It doesn't matter if it's power or water, public transportation, building management, emergency response. It's all the same thing. Inversely, as a threat actor, if you're looking to attack things on a activist level, at a military level, if you can't attack one system, you'll just attack another. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing what Mickey has to say about that. I think it'll be a great session. In following months, you'll see more and more of this on the website. You can register for, but we have a number of interesting speakers lined up. After that, Ray Potter in March is going to give a talk. Ray Potter from SafeLogic is going to give a talk about the application of crypto in ICS and how that works, and the pros and cons and gotchas and so forth. So that'll be interesting. Every Thursday now at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, we have an open call for members as part of our outreach and communication to keep the conversations going. I'm typically always there. There's always somebody from the center there, and any member or those of you who are not members or unable at this point to become members, we tend to call you associates. More than welcome to join us as long as you're trusted partners and so forth. At the discretion of the ISAC, feel free to contact us. And that's an hour-long session where we talk about all this stuff. You'll also find on the website an intro to ICS-ISAC that we hold every Tuesday. So that's meant to be a repetitive sort of thing for those of you who are familiar with the center. It may be interesting for you to join in. We try to keep that to 45 minutes, and where one of us will run through the basic overview of what the center is, why it's here, what we're trying to achieve, where we're going with this, and take questions and answers. Personally, I find those very interesting because the attendees tend to be a different mix every week, and we always end up having an interesting conversation then. The Publicly Accessible Control System Working Group, PACS, is a project that the ICS-ISAC kicked off late last year, based or initiated in large part by Bob Radvanovsky's and Kate Brodsky's work with Project Shine, which most people are familiar with, certainly in the community. For those of you who may be watching this later, this was research done that showed with reasonable effort that it was easy to identify large quantities of publicly accessible control systems that connect to the internet. And the researcher in this case came up with a data set of approximately 500,000 systems. And the PACS working group was created with the cooperation of EnergySec as a long-lived group effort on behalf of the private sector to work through the issues involved. And the Utilities Telecom Commission has volunteered an asset to help organize that. It's not going to be a chatter group. These are complex issues and legal issues and technical issues and procedural issues and research and development issues. So we'll look throughout this year and next year, and I imagine for a number of years, to try to drive a private sector conversation on those issues. How do we identify these systems? How do we make that information available to asset owners, to public sector, to private sector? What can possibly be done about that? It's these sorts of broad issues that have addressed all of us that the ICS-ISAC will consistently try to bring together to appropriate parties to work through. As we all know, there's not a lot of quick fixes laying around for us to address these needs. But we all as well understand that there's a future, whether it's 3 years or 5 years or 10 or 15 years from now, where the way we're doing things now won't be adequate, and we'll either have by then suffered significant incidents or we'll have managed to avoid them. So in the role of the ICS-ISAC, as we can play a part in driving the conversation, sharing the knowledge, helping the workforce that we need to develop be there to do the work. We're open to suggestions from the membership and from others in how we address that. And of course, you can reach us by a lot of means. If you don't find our email addresses, the info at goes to myself directly as well as other people at the ISAC. And we're always interested in hearing anything you have to say about any of that stuff. And Debbie, if you can take us to the next slide, the next last slide. So just to reiterate some of our key drivers, how we look at things. The future is shared. The information that we need to perform our tasks is always going to be beyond just in sheer quantity, but any of us can manage. In the community of expertise is working in this sector right now, or in this issue, in the segment, there's already more information, more knowledge than any one of us can consume or be aware of at any one time. how we share that knowledge without tripping over the obvious privacy and proprietary information deadfalls and so forth is going to be as large an issue as how we deal with these technical issues going forward. There's a lot of things that give us hope. The industrial control system community has a lot of sociological processes that, in our view, very specifically in my view, give us advantages over other security challenges we've dealt with in the past. These systems are awareness machines. As we can increase them at the technical level, at the workforce development level, at the process and procedural level, their ability to be situationally aware of their state. We enable them to be more effective. We enable them to be able to share knowledge with each other and with the rest of us, and achieve our goal of actually keeping society functioning. So Debbie, if you will take us to our last slide, I should say something along the lines of thank you for your time. And I would like to thank you all for your time. Anybody who wants to throw a comment in here at the end, feel free to do so. If not, Debbie can take us out, and we can all get a few minutes back in our day to try to make the world a slightly better place to be. Thank you very much.
On behalf of all of us at the ICS-ISAC, we appreciate your joining us today. We hope that you found the information of value and something that you can take and implement to further secure your industrial control systems. As a reminder, a recording of today's webinar can be found on the ICS-ISAC website. In addition, a summary of key points from today's presentation will be posted on the Center's website, LinkedIn and Facebook pages, as well as its Idea Scale discussion forum. Thank you again for your participation, and have an awesome rest of your day.